are well. I hope this week has been good to you. I am doing the core message for this week, and we are looking at Obadiah. The book of Obadiah is very short, so I'm not going to read any of it out or like have a key verse, because there's just one chapter, and it's very easy and quick to get through. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to give it a read. And you can see it literally, you'll just have it done in like 5 minutes. The writing style or the genre is poetry. It was designed to be easy to remember, so the formation of the verses and stuff is kind of fits into that poetic category. And Obadiah was a prophet, and Acts 3 tells us that in the writings of all of the prophets in the Bible, Jesus can be found in them. Christians love the word foreshadow. So if you do any of your own research or anything, you will see that word come up a lot in sort of the writings of the prophet, and this one is included in that as well. Obadiah was a defender of covenants, so the relationship and the promises between God and people. And the book reminds us that we were created for good, and that God's good purpose and for his glory is what we were designed for, and that our priority as human beings is to love and honour and serve God. So the book kind of continually reminds us of that. It's split into 2 sections. I know this kind of thing isn't always very interesting for everyone, but for those that it is, it just helps me to get my head around sort of why it was formed that way or what certain bits mean. So I hope that it is helpful for you as well. But it's split into 2 sections, and verse 15 kind of acts as like a hinge piece to join those 2 parts together. The first section is having a look at Edom and the fact that the leaders were really full of pride and self-exaltation, which in turn leads them to help an enemy defeat Israel. And this invasion, this war, this situation kind of breaks a long history of a bond of trust that wasn't without its issues, but there was a kind of a bond between this shared ancestry between Edom and Israel, and it can be traced right back to Genesis and Jacob. So again, that's really interesting little side note in your own time if you want to look into that kind of bit. It was quite interesting. But this situation, they kind of broke that trust, and Edom actively went against Israel and joined with the enemy to defeat Israel, and broke that bond and that trust. So the first half of the book is kind of about God's righteous judgment of Edom. And then the second half kind of talks generally about all prideful nations, and that they will in turn one day receive the same judgment if they act in the same way. And it's about God's righteous restoration of Israel. So Obadiah sees Edom's pride and fall kind of as an example or an image of how God will one day confront the pride of all nations, of everybody. So it's sort of in itself a parable of how God's justice will one day kind of oppose the pride and the arrogance and the violence among all nations. The prophecy is really clear throughout. As you read it through, it's really evident, it's really obvious even to us now, that Edom has been destroyed because of their arrogance and their kind of pride and their involvement in Israel's misery. And the start of the book, it doesn't seem very promising. It's not looking good. It's not nice. But it gives an insight into the character of God, and it helps us as readers now to kind of, well, and back then, to kind of demonstrate just how much, if we kind of look at it as symbolic of all mankind, it shows just how much God is opposed to prideful and arrogant nature, that it's the kind of direct opposite of what he intended when he created us, and that actually God intended we were created to be humble and full of humility and not full of pride and arrogance and self-exaltation. And I think when we think about pride and being proud and not being proud and being humble, I think it's easy to then almost have this false sense of like, oh, I'll be humble, I'll never be pleased with any of what I do, or, and I don't think that is what the Bible's saying. I think there is a normal sense of pride in certain things. So, I am proud of my kids when they do something good or they achieve something great, or in the same way that God is proud of us as his children. But I think what the Bible is talking about and warning us of the dangers of pride is about when it causes us to cause harm to others, or when we are proud of ourselves and our own achievements and we forget that everything we have and everything we do is for God and his glory. I think when it becomes to that state that we are full of our own self-importance and we forget our need for God, or we're causing harm to others, that is the dangerous pride that people are warning us against, and that is evident in the book of Obadiah. So I think it's okay to feel pleased that you've worked hard towards something, or that sort of thing. But if it is at a level where it's causing harm, or it's causing your relationship with God to suffer because you're thinking you've achieved everything all on your own, I think that's when it's dangerous. And in terms of this book and Obadiah, that is definitely where it was dangerous for Edom, and their pride caused them to cause harm to Israel. And they didn't help Israel, but instead they actively helped the enemy to against them. And it was that pride and arrogance and that involvement that caused in turn for Eden to be destroyed. Our pride needs to be rooted in Jesus and what he did for us, and this needs to shape us and allow us to move past ourselves and what we can do for ourselves and what we can gain for ourselves or what we can accomplish for ourselves. This pride in Jesus, in the gospel, in how we were designed to be, needs to shape us into serving God by helping others around us, and kind of demonstrating Jesus at work in and through us. So not for pride to cause us to cause harm or to forget who God is, but the direct opposite, that when our pride is based in being proud of Jesus and the gospel, it shapes us and it changes us, and then it allows us to help others. So we can learn from Edom's mistakes here, and instead of allowing our own pride to get in the way and causing harm on another person, so in Edom's case on Israel, we can learn from this. We can see God's character reflected in how much that hurt him and how much that's not how he designed it to be. And we can allow our pride to be rooted in Jesus and what he's done for us, which will then allow us to help other people in situations and not just be looking out for ourselves and what we can accomplish and gain for ourselves. I think the book of Obadiah is kind of evidence that God doesn't turn a blind eye to things that hurt us, or when others betray us, and we can take encouragement from that, because I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult in relationships to get to a point where I let the wall come down and I trust other people and I let them in. I personally find that quite difficult. I know that's one of my downfalls, and I think when you've done that and then someone goes behind your back or betrays you or hurts you or whatever the situation is, it can be very difficult to then let yourself get in that position again, or trust somebody again, or to see, you think that situation was really unfair. But we can take encouragement from the fact that though those situations, God doesn't turn a blind eye to things. And in the same way, like we've just learned, we need to make sure that we're not causing that hurt to other people as well, and that we are learning that our actions and our intentions are really important to be rooted and based in Jesus and God's kingdom, and not just on ourselves, or else we will end up hurting and betraying people who we care for, and it's a vicious cycle. So although the book isn't very promising to start, as always in the Bible, God's judgment is never the final word. There is always hope. There is always goodness that comes out of these situations. So it takes a turn. And, God's promises throughout the Bible are about hope, and the hope of God's kingdom. And the two books that came before Obadiah are very much about that as well. And so Obadiah is positioned very specifically where it is within the books of the Bible as another reminder of God's hope and the hope of God's kingdom. It's a reminder that God's kingdom is so vastly different to the empires and the kingdoms of our world now and back then. You just have to watch the news for 5 minutes to see greed and betrayal and violence and war and to see that these kingdoms, these empires, these things that we are part of, this world that we are part of, is not how God intended it to be. And God's kingdom is so vastly different and an opposite to that. And it is just, and it is universal. And I think it is for this reason that the book of Obadiah concludes with such a hopeful future. God knows that the times that we are living in, people are always going to not live in a way that he intended, and there's going to be harm caused to others. He knows this, and I think these books, as short as Obadiah is really powerful, and it's a really, really good reminder of God's kingdom and God's judgment and righteousness and justness and fair. That is God's character, and it is kind of you see pockets of that throughout the writing, which is really encouraging for us now as well as for the time that it was written. The book contributes to kind of the larger picture of God's justice and faithfulness, and that is just who God is, and that is sort of shown throughout that and is encouraging for us. And I think it is a needed reminder for our current times. I think at the minute, especially the last few months, not even thinking about, COVID, moving past that, post-COVID, these literally really recent few months, there's all this talk and in the media, and, people have worked out all these things, and they're telling us about recession and the prices of energy bills and the cost of living crisis and everything going up. And we've just had a change of leadership, and there's uncertainty and there's fear and there's worry. And I think sometimes when I then read books like Obadiah and I think, okay, people have gone through really unsettling, traumatic times, and I can identify how that feels. And for us right now, we might read it with that filter on and think, I can really relate to how you're feeling, because at the minute, things are looking bleak and I am worried, and I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills, and I don't know how my friend's going to pay my bills. I don't know, if my job is secure, or whatever it is for you personally at the moment. And we have the privilege to have such easy access to the Bible to remind ourselves that it's okay, that God is in control, that he is fair and he is just, that he is noticing and he's not turning a blind eye to these things that are going on, and that whether, whenever it is, that his judgment will kind of take place and it will be okay. And I think the takeaway from Obadiah for me is that kind of if Edom's pride is representative of our human nature, we will, or we do, or we are all capable of betraying and hurting each other for our own needs and for our own glorification, and for, but that our hope is in God's healing kingdom of peace. And I think it is that living in peace despite what's happened to us or is happening around us, choosing to sit in God's peace and to live in God's peace and to remember God's kingdom and not the ones that we are part of in this world is just such an encouragement to me, and I hope to you as you read through Obadiah yourself, that we're not on our own, that God is with us, that okay, solutions might not be immediate, but that God's promises are still true. He does answer prayer in whatever form, however long that takes, this side of glory or when we're in heaven, whatever it looks like, that we have this eternal hope in a kingdom that is just full of goodness and kindness and justice and faithfulness and love and peace. And it is that helps to ground me and keep me going and allow me to treat people around me differently and not hoard for myself but try to give out to others, and not to think in the natural, to be aware of the things that are going on but to not let them define or control me, but to let God's kingdom principles define and control me and my actions. And I think for me, as I was reading Obadiah, that was my takeaway, that God's justice and fairness is always it's just who he is. He can't turn that off, the same way that his love he can't turn off. That's just who he is. It's a character of him. And to me, that is just really encouraging, especially when things seem uncertain, to keep me going. So I really hope that encourages you as well, and just reminds you even of those things about God for you in your life. Have a great week, and I will hopefully see you soon.